Now, in discussing the amendments to MVSS 301 in this General Motors engineering staff document, Mr. Fisher states that in discussing the requirements, a more significant leak causation factor is probably puncture of the fuel tank by surrounding parts and structure, and perhaps a good evaluation of these factors could accomplish more than the revisions, referring to revising FMVSS 301.
Than these revisions.
Than these revisions, excuse me. Now, as an engineer, Mr. Ivey, do you agree with that statement?
Well, I would say one thing in looking at this. I don't know what revisions were being considered way back when, and I can't pick that up from the context of this document. You know, there's some allusions to what he's talking about as the other alternatives. I would note that you have to pay very careful attention to the things that surround a fuel tank in designing a car.
And that's my point. In other words, you agree that it would be good engineering practice to look to the, in the design of a vehicle, to look to the different component parts that could potentially puncture the tank in determining what is a safe design from an engineering perspective.
All of that is considered when you design a car.
Okay. And should be considered, correct?
Well, like I said, it is considered.
And was that your goal when you designed the J-Car, when you were manager of J-Car engineering, to design out all of the potential components that could puncture the gas tank?
Objection, the form of the question. He never said that he was involved as manager of the J-Car, which is the subject of this lawsuit.
You can answer.
Well, I couldn't agree with you know, your premise there. You have to design a car using all factors that you have to take into consideration, and what surrounds a gas tank is one of those things. But you cannot possibly design something that prevents anything from impacting on a tank, because you can't predict what kind of accidents will happen. So we run standardized tests to evaluate the systems, and we base our engineering of the vehicle based on those very severe standardized tests.
You would agree with me, wouldn't you, that it's an appropriate engineering goal or requirement to design out potential puncture mechanisms in the area of the tank?
As I said, that's a standard practice, but there's many things in, you know, in the crashing of a car that can happen in many circumstances that can cause things to happen that you couldn't predict or couldn't foresee. That's just the nature of having cars on the road. That happens.
You'd agree with me, though, wouldn't you, that one of the things you should use as a predictor of potential puncture mechanisms is the crash test you run out there on your crash yards at General Motors. That's a fair statement, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, back to Mr. Fisher's memo. I just want to ask you, the result of his memo, or his cost-benefit analysis here on the General Motors engineering staff document, is that then we, is what he says, could spend $2 a car after doing this calculation concerning fire fatalities and the cost associated with them. Is that correct?
The document speaks for itself.
Yes, sir. And is that what the document says, Mr.
I repeat the objection. Go ahead, sir.
I guess the way I read it, it says then we could spend $2 per car for, effectively, for rear impact protection.
Go ahead and read the rest of the sentence.
And this would be used up in fuel for the additional weight required.
And my point is, the result of his mathematical analysis was that GM could spend $2 a car
objection, the document speaks for itself. That's not what the entire sentence says.
Like I said, I don't know that, having just seen this document, just read it now, I have no idea what, Mr. Fisher actually meant here. There's a sentence in there that says that we, I don't know that we is even General Motors, that could be society, that could be, there's a lot of context in here that I wouldn't know what he meant. There's other things in here like a cost benefit equals 1. I don't even know what that means, he says in the statement above the calculation. So.
Well, let me ask you that. In the statement above the calculation, he does refer to cost benefit equals 1, correct?
Yes, and I have no idea what that means.
And the result of his mathematical analysis was that we could spend $2 a car, correct?
Objection, repetitious, the document speaks for itself, and he has already answered it that he doesn't know who he is.
I can't say any more.
Okay. And the word society or societal is not anywhere contained in this General Motors engineering staff document, is it?
I don't think that it is.
But at the very top of it, it says General Motors engineering staff, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in your value analysis, Mr. Ivey, you went on and did a second calculation, did you not?
Yes.
And in that calculation, you looked to the number of cars built by GM per year in the first assumption, didn't you?
Yes.
And you assessed that GM was at that time building 5 million cars per year. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then your second assumption in your calculation is that approximately 11% of the automobiles on the road are of current model year at the end of that model year, correct?
That's what I wrote.
Then you went on to write in your 1973 value analysis that this analysis indicates that for GM it would be worth approximately $2.20 per new model auto to prevent a fuel-fed fire in all accidents. Is that correct?
That conclusion is incorrect, but that's what I wrote.
Okay. And the question is, you wrote in your value analysis that this analysis indicates that for GM it would be worth approximately $2.20 per new model auto to prevent all fuel-fed fires and all accidents, correct?
I'm going to object, and counsel, you just asked exactly the same question twice, and that's repetitious, and you're harassing this witness by repeating the same question.
You can answer.
Well, would you read back the last question and answer, and then this question?
Then you went on to write in your 1973 value analysis that this analysis indicates that for GM, it would be worth approximately $2.20 per new model auto to prevent a fuel-fed fire in all accidents. Is that correct? Answer, that conclusion is incorrect, but that's what I wrote. Question, okay. And the question is, you wrote in your value analysis that this analysis indicates that for GM, it would be worth approximately $2.20 per new model auto to prevent all fuel-fed fires in all accidents, correct?
You can answer.
Same way you did last time.
Well, I would have to say that, but you happen to misread that. You said prevent all fuel-fed fires and all accidents. It doesn't say that. It isn't written that way.
I'm sorry if I did. It says prevent a fuel-fed fire in all accidents, correct?
That's what it says, but that conclusion is incorrect.
But it's what you wrote in 1973 in this memo. It wasn't transcribed incorrectly, was it?
That's what I wrote in 1973.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Now, and in arriving at that conclusion in your value analysis, you again did a mathematical formula. Is that correct?
Yes.
Would you, and again, you used different numbers, you narrowed it to a year, but it's very similar to your first mathematical formula, correct?
Yes.
You took the 55 fatalities per year, which is 11% of the 500 fatalities, and multiplied that number by the $200,000 cost or worth per fatality. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then you divided that number by the 5 million new models on the road as opposed to the 41 million total models. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what I calculated.
And in doing that mathematical formula, you came up with the result that it would be worth approximately $2.20 per new model auto to prevent a fuel-fed fire in all accidents, correct?
Objection. The document speaks for itself.
You can
That's not
answer.
what it says.
The $2.20 is a result of the calculation that I made.
Okay. Now, would you classify this mathematical calculation that you did twice in your value analysis as a cost-benefit analysis?
No, I wouldn't.
Let me show you, had you ever seen any General Motors documents prior to sitting down in your office in 1973 and doing this value analysis that addressed cost-benefit analysis for safety issues?
I couldn't say one way or the other. I wouldn't remember.
Maybe you did. Is that fair? You're not saying you didn't, you're saying you just don't remember.
Have no way of knowing whether I'd remembered whether what I'd seen prior to this back then. It was, what, over 25 years ago?
Okay. Well, let me show you what I've marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 5 that was produced to me by General Motors yesterday, and ask you if you can identify this document, please, sir.
I don't know that I've ever seen this document before.
Would you agree with me that it is a General Motors document?
It appears to be.
And as I said, I'll represent to you, it was produced to me in this case, Bates number 31025. And would you agree with me that in the top left-hand corner it says GM Proving Ground? Is that correct?
Yes.
And then it says Engineering Report. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then it has a report number PG28923. Is that correct?
Do you have an extra copy of that?
Yes, that's the number.
Thank you.
And it also has a project number 90-891. Is that correct?
Yes.
And this document is dated July 20, this General Motors document is dated July 23, 1970. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the title of this document is Estimating the Benefit in Automotive Safety cost/benefit analysis, correct?
Yes.
And the author of this document is a Mr. T. Terry, is that correct?
Yes.
Mr. Terry is a General Motors employee. Do you know him?
No.
Ever talked to him that you recall?
Don't recall the name.
Okay. Do you know where he worked at General Motors?
No, I don't know him at all.
Now, this document was approved by another General Motors employee, Mr. R.A. Wilson, who is listed as engineer in charge. Do you know Mr. Wilson?
It seems like I know the name. I may have met Mr. Wilson in the past.
You understand that he's a General Motors engineer, correct?
I'd have to assume that. Yeah.
And you agree with me that he approved the document, the estimating the benefit in automotive safety cost-benefit analysis that I've marked as Exhibit 5 to your deposition. You agree with that, don't you?
Well, that's what's typed. That's
what
what
it says,
on here.
yes,
That's
sir.
all I can say.
Yes, sir. Now, I want you to take a minute to look at this document and see if it refreshes your memory about whether you had ever seen a General Motors document concerning cost-benefit analysis prior to sitting down in 1973 and writing your value analysis of auto fuel-fed fire-related fatalities.
Take your time if you need to.
Mr. Ivey, while you're reading that, would you agree with me?
Wait. You want me to stop reading?
I have a question for him. There are only a couple of questions I have about this document, so I'm going to direct your attention to those areas
Well,
and
I'd
let
like
you
to
read
be able
them.
to finish reading the whole
Well,
thing.
then we can go off the record and not take this as the time, because this is a very long document. I'm only going to ask him a few questions about it. And as you know, we have an hour and a half time limit. And if you want him to take additional time, I want to go off the record and not count the time.
You can go off the record. I'm not sure it's not going to count the time. You can do anything you want to on the record.
Mr. Ivey, would you agree with me that this document, the estimating the benefit and automotive safety cost-benefit analysis, this General Motors document is dated less than 3 years prior to the time you sat down in your office and wrote the value analysis we've been discussing?
You can answer that.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to ask you a few questions about this document, Mr. Ivey, and I'm going to point you to very specific areas of it. Do you feel that we need to take a break for you to read the entire document? Because if you do, we certainly will.
Well, I guess it depends on where you want to go with this. Of the part I've read so far, I have to tell you I have no recollection of ever seeing this before.
It hasn't refreshed your memory? You don't recall seeing it?
Of the stuff I've read so far. It's pretty interesting, but I've never, I don't have any recollection of ever seeing this.
Let me direct your attention to the introduction in the 3rd page of the document. That's including the cover.
Yes.
Would you agree with me that the introduction to this cost-benefit document of General Motors says, priorities of development and the method of evaluation of alternative design proposals of automotive safety systems should be established on some rational basis. One such rational basis uses cost/benefit analysis to rank order priorities of development and to evaluate design alternatives. That is a correct statement in the introduction of this document, is it not?
You know, before you go any further, I want to object for the record. You indicated that this was produced by General Motors and in this case, and I don't believe it was.
Yes, sir, Bud. You need to look right here. It says produced in GMC, Lindsey Jones versus GMC, and it has your Bates stamp number on it. It was delivered to me yesterday in a box of material in my hotel room here. The documents that you have, the copies, were not produced in this case, but the marked exhibit was produced in this lawsuit.
All right, that was in the box.
It was in the box of Horizon material that you sent me yesterday.
All right.
Thank
and I
you.
withdraw that objection.
Is this, why does our copy have a different, why is our copy different from yours?
Do you want to go off the record? And I don't really think we should be taking up my time in this deposition.
It'll just take 5 seconds.
You produced this
Just tell me-
document.
I know, just tell me why my copy is different.
Because I got it from a different source, but you've produced it in this case.
All right.
I requested it, you produced it, there's the Bates number copy that you produced that he's reading from.
I just
Do
want
we
to know why
understand
I
that?
have a different copy. I just want to make sure my copy is the same as your copy.
It is exactly the same, and if you want to take a break, you can compare it
keep going.
page for page. Thank you. Now,
The question was what he read, is that an accurate reading of what you have before you?
That seems to be, yes.
okay. Now, would you agree with me that what you did in your value analysis is, in fact, what is set out here in the first 2 sentences of this introduction? You did a cost-benefit analysis to rank the priorities of the development to evaluate design alternatives. Would you agree with that statement?
No, I wouldn't agree with that at all.
You would not. I want to go on and direct your attention to the 2nd paragraph, 3rd full sentence in the introduction, and it says, "It is therefore important to identify the present injury patterns and cause of death in current vehicles. The study of field accident data is the most meaningful way to present injury patterns and cause of death in automobile accidents." Is that a correct statement?
Are you reading it correctly?
Yes.
Yeah,
But
And
that's
is
what
that-
to the question. You asked, was it a correct statement? And that's asking him to comment on it.
Are you keeping up with the time for these objections?
that's what's written, that's what I can say. I wouldn't disagree
That
with
is what's written, and you don't disagree with
No.
it. And in fact, isn't that what you did in your value analysis? You looked to and went out and got field data on the number of deaths per year in fuel-fed fires, didn't you?
That's what I use as a basis of my calculation, yes.
Just the way they set it out here in the introduction of the General Motors cost-benefit analysis.
Yes, but
Yes.
Wait.
Let
Let him finish his answer.
Yeah.
Go
You
ahead, sir.
finish, Mr. Ivey. I
Sir,
certainly don't want to cut you
Please
off.
don't interrupt him. Let him answer.
Just made note of the fact that what I did was not a cost-benefit analysis.
Okay, but what you did in your analysis was to go out and look at field statistics and get the number of deaths per year in fuel-fed fires, just as they set out here in the introduction of General Motors' way of doing cost-benefit analysis. Is that correct?
Objection.
Well, I did
Or,
not...
excuse me, I object to the form of the question because you identify this as General Motors cost-benefit analysis. This was merely a report. It does not say that it speaks for the way General Motors is doing it.
You can answer.
I used a couple of academic studies for the field data that I used to come up with the numbers. So I don't know that that was, I don't know that that means the same thing as the way you asked the question.
Okay, but this document talks about getting the numbers of injuries or deaths and doing an analysis, and you certainly looked to the number of deaths in fuel-fed fires to do your analysis, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I also want to direct your attention to the conclusion on page 6 of this document, estimating the benefit and automotive safety cost-benefit analysis.
Let me read that. I didn't
Certainly.
get that far.
It's just one paragraph.
Yes, I've read that.
And it says in the final sentence of that conclusion, this quantification of benefit is necessary if meaningful cost-benefit analysis are to be made in order to establish priorities of development of automotive safety systems or to evaluate alternative design proposals. Is that correct?
Well, that's what's written, but I didn't read the rest of the report, so I don't, know how that relates to what was actually in the report.
Well, certainly your analysis looks to the cost and benefit that you assessed to determine how much per vehicle could be spent to prevent fuel-fed fire deaths, doesn't it?
That's, it's stated similar to that, but like I said, my conclusions are incorrect.
But the analysis you wrote in 1973 uses a mathematical formula to determine how much per car can be spent to eliminate fuel-fed fire deaths, correct?
Objection, repetitious. He's already answered for the qualification.
Well, all I can say is it doesn't matter when I wrote that or how that goes, that conclusion is incorrect. And I also, at the last paragraph in this report, quantified my own analysis even though it was incorrect.
Yes, sir. And in that last paragraph, you state that you really can't put a value on a human life, can you?
I wouldn't.
And you agree with that today, don't you?
Yes.
But you did put a value on a human life in your calculation so that you would have an objective formula to determine the result that you got. Is that a fair way of putting it?
There is a number in here. I used a government figure, which relates to societal cost, not General Motors cost.
Yes. Now, I want to direct your attention.
If you're changing topics, I'd like to take a 5-minute break.
I'm not, but we can certainly take a 5-minute break.
Okay.
All right.
Going off the record at 9:32.
Because I'd stop my watch. for one of those.
Back on the record, 9:40 a.m.
Now, Mr. Ivey, we've taken a break. I want to direct your attention to Exhibit 5 again. The General Motors Estimating the Benefit and Automotive Safety Cost-Benefit Analysis, and ask you if you would look to the last page of that document, please, sir. Is that a distribution sheet?
That's the way it's titled, yes.
Does the distribution sheet actually even list the number of copies that went to each individual that got this report?
Yes.
And I want to direct your attention to the third to bottom line. Did Mr. J.B. Ridenour of Oldsmobile Division get one copy of this document entitled Estimating the Benefit and Automotive Safety Cost-Benefit Analysis?
That's what's on the distribution page.
According to the distribution sheet. Now, you know Mr. Ridenour, don't you?
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, just 3 weeks before you wrote your value analysis of automotive fuel-fed fires, you were meeting and discussing fuel tank designs with Mr. Ridenour, weren't you?
I was working on a fuel tank location project with
Let me
Mr.
show you a document that I have marked as Exhibit 6 to your deposition, and it is entitled 1977 Fuel Tank Design Discussion, and the date June 6, 73 is over your name, E.C. Ivey, and ask you if you've ever seen that document before, please, sir.
Do you have Exhibit 1B?
Yes, I've seen this document.
And in fact, you wrote this document, didn't you?
I don't remember writing it, but it's got my name on it, so I believe that I did.
Okay. You don't disagree with that? Your name is typed at the bottom of the document, the third page, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's over the date June 6, 1973.
Yes.
And June 6, 1973 would be just 3 weeks before you wrote your June 29, 1973 value analysis. Is that correct?
Objection repetitious.
You can answer.
Yes.